A CEO coldly dismisses Mark Wilson's desperate request for a raise, unaware that Keanu Reeves witnesses everything from across the lobby. Mark needed that money for his mother's medical bills, but CEO Richard Campbell only sees his employees as disposable resources. What Campbell doesn't know is that his callous rejection will cost him everything. When Keanu Reeves unexpectedly purchases TechVision Incorporated, the power dynamic suddenly shifts. Campbell's shock upon discovering his new boss will be nothing compared to the moment Keanu utters the words that will change both men's lives forever. "You're fired." Mark Wilson hurried through the crowded subway station, his worn leather messenger bag tucked under his arm as he checked his watch for the third time. The accounting clerk couldn't afford to be late to TechVision Incorporated again, especially not today. After 3 years of dedicated service, countless overtime hours, and consistently exceeding his targets, Mark had finally mustered the courage to ask for what he desperately needed, a raise. The fluorescent lights of the TechVision lobby flickered slightly as Mark badged in, nodding politely to the security guard who knew him by name. Unlike the executives who swept in at 9 and left by 5, Mark arrived early and stayed late, a fixture so reliable that the night cleaning crew often left him coffee. His desk in the accounting department sat among dozens of identical cubicles, the only personal touch a small framed photo of his mother, Emily. At 58, Emily Wilson should have been enjoying retirement. Instead, she battled an aggressive form of rheumatoid arthritis that insurance only partially covered. The medications alone consumed nearly half of Mark's monthly salary, forcing him to pick up weekend shifts at a local hardware store just to make rent on their modest 2-bedroom apartment. His mother had given everything to raise him after his father's death, working 3 jobs to put him through college. Now it was his turn to care for her, but the financial strain was becoming unbearable. 12 floors above Mark's cubicle, CEO Richard Campbell stood at his floor-to-ceiling windows, surveying the city skyline as if it were his personal kingdom. TechVision had tripled its value under his leadership, cutting unnecessary costs and streamlining operations. Corporate speak for slashing benefits and increasing workloads. The quarterly report in his hand showed record profits, numbers that would translate to a 7-figure bonus for himself and the executive team. Campbell checked his Rolex, a gift to himself after last year's successful acquisition of a struggling competitor whose employees he'd promptly laid off. The board meeting would start in 30 minutes, where he'd unveil plans for further optimization. He smiled, rehearsing the presentation in his mind. More cuts, more profit, more personal glory. Employee satisfaction didn't factor into his equations. People were replaceable resources, interchangeable parts in the profit-generating machine he'd engineered. Mark Wilson and Richard Campbell worked in the same building but existed in different worlds. One defined by necessity and care, the other by ambition and indifference. Their collision course was set, though neither man could possibly foresee how dramatically their lives would soon intertwine. Mark adjusted his tie nervously as the elevator ascended toward the executive floor. His reflection in the polished metal doors showed a man trying his best. His shirt ironed but slightly worn at the collar, his tie a sale rack purchase from 3 years ago. He'd rehearsed his pitch countless times, practiced his breathing techniques, and brought printed documentation of his accomplishments and contributions to TechVision. The accounting department's quarterly audit had uncovered a tax filing strategy Mark developed that saved the company over $200,000. His supervisor had taken credit for the innovation, but Mark didn't mind. What mattered was having concrete evidence of his value to present to Campbell. The CEO's calendar showed a rare 15-minute opening at 11:30, and Mark's department head had reluctantly approved the meeting after weeks of persistent requests. The executive floor existed in stark contrast to the cramped, utilitarian spaces where Mark worked. Plush carpeting absorbed his footsteps as he approached the CEO's corner office. Campbell's executive assistant, Diane, glanced up from her sleek glass desk with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Campbell is expecting you, but he's on an important call. Wait here." Her tone suggested Mark should be grateful for even these moments of the CEO's valuable time. Mark sat on the edge of a designer chair, his folder of carefully prepared materials clutched in slightly damp hands. Through the glass walls, he could see Campbell pacing in his office, wireless earbuds in, laughing at something the person on the other end had said. 7 minutes ticked by, then 12. Mark's allocated 15 minutes were nearly consumed before Campbell gestured dismissively for him to enter. "Wilson, right? From accounting? Make it quick." Campbell didn't look up from his tablet as he settled into his ergonomic chair that probably cost more than Mark's monthly rent. Mark cleared his throat. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Campbell." I've been with TechVision for over 3 years now, and... I know who you are, Campbell interrupted, still scrolling through emails. What do you want? Mark placed his folder on the desk, opening it to reveal charts of his performance metrics and the tax strategy documentation. Sir, I've consistently exceeded my targets and recently developed a filing strategy that saved the company substantial. Is this about a raise? Campbell finally looked up, his expression hardening. Did Hartman put you up to this? No, sir. This is my own initiative. My personal circumstances have changed, and I believe my contributions warrant. Campbell closed the folder without looking at its contents, sliding it back across the desk. Everyone wants more money, Wilson. Everyone thinks they're special. My mother's medical bills have increased significantly, and I've been working 2 jobs too. Your personal problems aren't TechVision's concern. Campbell stood, signaling the meeting was ending before it had truly begun. We're implementing a company-wide wage freeze for the next 2 quarters. The board expects certain profit margins. Mark felt his carefully constructed composure crumbling. Sir, I haven't had an adjustment since I started. Even a small increase would make a significant difference in my ability to. If your financial situation is so desperate, perhaps you should focus on your career advancement more seriously. Campbell's voice was cold, clinical. Or find employment elsewhere if our compensation doesn't meet your needs. The dismissal was absolute. Mark gathered his folder, his hands trembling slightly as he tucked it back into his bag. Thank you for your time, he managed, professional until the end despite the knot forming in his stomach. Campbell had already returned to his tablet, Mark's existence already forgotten. As Mark exited the office, Campbell's voice drifted after him, speaking to someone on the phone. Just another entitlement case. They never understand the big picture. The elevator doors closed on Mark's hope, descending back to his reality where tonight he would have to tell his mother they couldn't afford her new medication after all. Keanu Reeves stepped through the revolving doors of the TechVision building that afternoon, his presence largely unnoticed despite his fame. Dressed in a simple black suit with no tie, he blended with the stream of business professionals flowing through the lobby. He wasn't there for TechVision specifically. He was meeting his financial advisor whose firm occupied the 7th floor to discuss investments for his charitable foundation. The lobby buzzed with the usual corporate energy, people rushing between meetings, couriers delivering packages, security guards scanning badges. But something caught Keanu's attention. Amid the purposeful movement, a man sat alone on a bench near the coffee kiosk, staring at his phone with a hollow expression of someone whose world had just collapsed. Mark Wilson had been sitting there for nearly 20 minutes, unable to return to his desk. The pharmacy had just texted that his mother's prescription was ready. $3.40 for a 2-week supply. His checking account showed $412.57, and rent was due in 3 days. The math was impossible, the choices unbearable. He'd already maxed out his credit cards covering last month's emergency room visit. His mother would insist he pay the rent first. She would say she could manage without the medication for a while, though they both knew that wasn't true. Keanu paused, watching as the man closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. There was something about his quiet dignity and obvious despair that resonated with him. In his years of fame, Keanu had developed an acute awareness of human emotion, a sensitivity to genuine suffering that cut through the artifice that often surrounded him. As Mark stood to return to work, he accidentally knocked over his untouched coffee. The dark liquid spread across the marble floor as Mark scrambled for napkins, his face flushing with embarrassment, one final indignity to cap his disastrous morning. "Here, let me help," a gentle voice offered. Mark looked up to find Keanu Reeves kneeling beside him, already sopping up coffee with a handful of napkins. Thank you. I'm sorry, I wasn't." Mark stuttered, the surreal moment temporarily displacing his troubles. "No need to apologize." Keanu's voice was quiet, genuine. Bad days happen to everyone. Their eyes met briefly, and Mark was struck by the sincerity he found there. Not the practiced sympathy of someone observing suffering from a distance, but the empathetic connection of someone who understood loss. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," Mark managed, gathering his composure. "Just Keanu," he replied with a slight smile. "Take care of yourself." Mark nodded, watching as Keanu walked toward the elevators. The brief encounter had lasted less than a minute, but somehow the small act of kindness anchored him, giving him just enough strength to return to his desk. Keanu stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the 7th floor. Something about the man's defeated posture and the way he had tried to maintain his dignity despite obvious distress lingered in his mind. As the doors closed, he caught a glimpse of the man walking back toward the office elevators, shoulders slightly straighter than before, but still carrying what was clearly a heavy burden. The meeting with his financial advisor had gone quickly, but Keanu found himself lingering in the TechVision building. The man from the lobby remained in his thoughts. There had been something particularly troubling about his despair. Not the usual workplace stress, but the weight of someone facing impossible choices. Back in the lobby, Keanu noticed the security guard chatting with a maintenance worker. He approached casually, his celebrity status hidden behind his understated demeanor and the general business rush. "Excuse me," Keanu said. "The man who was sitting here earlier. Does he work in this building?" The security guard nodded. "Mark Wilson, accounting department, 12th floor. Comes in early, leaves late. One of the good ones. Been here for years," the maintenance worker added. "Always thanks me by name. Most of them don't even see me." Keanu asked a few more questions, keeping his tone conversational. He learned that Mark worked for TechVision, one of the largest tech infrastructure companies in the country. The security guard mentioned that Mark sometimes worked weekends, and recently had started taking calls during his lunch break from what sounded like a second job. That evening, in the privacy of his hotel suite, Keanu researched TechVision Incorporated. The company had started as an innovative tech solution provider but had transformed under Richard Campbell's leadership into a profit-focused giant that supplied critical infrastructure to numerous industries. Their stock had risen 340% in the past 5 years, with much of that growth attributed to Campbell's aggressive optimization strategies. Keanu dug deeper, finding articles praising Campbell's business acumen alongside quiet reports of declining employee satisfaction and increasing turnover. One business journal had featured Campbell on its cover with the headline, "The Profit Emperor: How Richard Campbell Turned TechVision into a Goldmine." The accompanying interview revealed a man obsessed with metrics, margins, and market dominance. "People talk about corporate culture and employee happiness," Campbell was quoted saying, "but at the end of the day, the only number that truly matters is shareholder value." Something about Campbell's clinical approach to business bothered Keanu. Throughout his career, he had encountered many wealthy, powerful people, but he had always been troubled by those who viewed human beings as mere assets to be leveraged and discarded. The next morning, Keanu made a call to Jordan, his longtime friend and investment partner. They had previously collaborated on several ventures, always with an eye toward ethical business practices. TechVision? Campbell's company? Jordan sounded surprised. "They're solid financially, but their corporate practices are notorious." "Why the interest?" Keanu shared his encounter with Mark and what he'd learned about the company. "I think there's potential there, but not the way Campbell sees it." "You want to buy a tech company because you met a sad accountant in the lobby?" Jordan's tone was skeptical but affectionate. He knew Keanu's compassionate nature well enough not to dismiss it outright. "Not exactly. I've been looking for a way to demonstrate that treating employees well isn't just the right thing to do. It's good business. TechVision has the infrastructure and market position, but Campbell's approach is unsustainable." Over the next week, Keanu and Jordan conducted extensive due diligence. They discovered that despite record profits, TechVision faced rising insurance costs due to employee burnout and health issues. Customer satisfaction scores had declined 3 quarters in a row. Most importantly, they identified a vulnerability. Campbell had leveraged the company heavily for his aggressive expansion strategy, making it potentially vulnerable to the right acquisition offer. Keanu arranged discreet meetings with key board members, presenting a vision for TechVision that balanced profit with purpose. Several were receptive, particularly those who had expressed concerns about Campbell's ruthless methods. "Campbell delivers results," one board member admitted during a private dinner, "but his methods create enemies. We've lost talented people. Some of our best clients stay with us despite Campbell, not because of him." By the end of the 3rd week, Keanu and Jordan had secured enough board support to make their move. Through their investment group, they prepared an offer that was generous enough to be irresistible to shareholders while still representing a sound investment. The final component was ensuring absolute secrecy about Keanu's involvement. His name appeared nowhere in the official documentation, hidden behind layers of corporate entities. All that remained was to wait for the right moment to strike. The announcement struck TechVision headquarters on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. Employees arrived to find security personnel in unfamiliar uniforms positioned throughout the building. An all-staff email summoned everyone to the main conference rooms for an urgent company update at 9:30 a.m. Speculation spread through the office like wildfire. Mark sat at his desk, watching people rush past, their faces animated with a mixture of fear and excitement. Rumors of acquisitions and layoffs had circulated for months. Campbell's aggressive expansion strategy had left the company with significant debt despite its profitability. Still, nobody had expected anything this sudden or dramatic. Richard Campbell strode into the executive conference room 5 minutes before the scheduled announcement, his usual confidence momentarily shaken by the unexpected summons. The board members were already seated, their expressions unreadable. Campbell's executive assistant handed him a sealed envelope as he entered. "What's going on here?" Campbell demanded, scanning the faces around the table. "Why wasn't I informed about this meeting?" The board chairwoman, Eleanor Winters, spoke first. "Richard, please take a seat. The board has made a decision that affects your position." Campbell tore open the envelope, his eyes widening as he scanned the contents. "This is impossible. You can't sell the company without my—" "We didn't need your approval," Winters interrupted calmly. "The shareholders voted yesterday. The offer was too substantial to refuse." Campbell's face flushed with anger. "Who? Which competitor stabbed me in the back?" "Oracle. Microsoft." "Not a competitor," Winters replied. "A private investment group called Arch River Holdings. They've acquired a controlling stake in TechVision, effective immediately." Campbell laughed dismissively. "I've never heard of them. Some equity firm thinking they can run a tech company? This is absurd. I built TechVision from nothing. The board can't seriously believe some unknown investors can replace me." A quiet voice came from the doorway. "Not unknown, Mr. Campbell. Just discreet." The room fell silent as Keanu Reeves entered, followed by his business partner Jordan and 2 lawyers carrying folders of documents. Campbell's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror. "You," he finally managed. "Arch River Holdings is my investment group," Keanu confirmed, his voice calm but authoritative. "The transition team will be assuming operational control today. Your expertise during the handover period would be valuable, but not essential." Throughout the building, employees watched live streams of the announcement, gasping collectively when Keanu's face appeared on screen. In the accounting department, Mark stared in disbelief at his monitor, remembering their brief interaction in the lobby. Back in the conference room, Campbell had regained his composure and was now in full defensive mode. "This is outrageous. I've delivered record profits year after year. The company's value has tripled under my leadership. Whatever your intention is here, you're making a catastrophic business mistake." Keanu took a seat at the table, placing his folder deliberately before him. "The financials are impressive, certainly. But we believe TechVision's true potential lies beyond pure profit metrics." "What exactly do you know about running a tech company?" Campbell sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "I know that a company is only as strong as its people," Keanu replied evenly. "And from what we've observed, yours are overworked, undervalued, and burning out at an unsustainable rate." Campbell scoffed. "Typical Hollywood sentimentality. This isn't a movie script where everyone gets a happy ending. This is business." Keanu's expression remained neutral. "I think you'll find, Mr. Campbell, that treating people with dignity isn't just morally right, it's profitable. But we'll have plenty of time to discuss different management philosophies during tomorrow's board meeting. For now, I suggest you prepare your transition materials." The message was clear. The era of Richard Campbell had ended. A new vision for TechVision was beginning. The boardroom felt different the next morning. The imposing mahogany table that had witnessed countless decisions favoring profit over people now served as the stage for a confrontation years in the making. The executive team sat nervously, their usual confidence replaced by uncertainty about their futures under the new ownership. Richard Campbell arrived last, deliberately 10 minutes late, a power move that had intimidated subordinates for years. He wore his most expensive suit and carried a leather portfolio containing meticulously prepared arguments about why his leadership remained indispensable. His strategy was clear: impress the actor with financial acumen, overwhelm him with technical details, and secure a generous departure package if retention proved impossible. The conversation stopped as he entered. Keanu sat at the head of the table, Campbell's seat, with Jordan beside him and several unfamiliar faces he assumed were part of the transition team. Campbell forced a tight smile and took the only remaining chair, noticeably farther from the center of power than he was accustomed to. "Now that we're all here," Keanu began, his tone measured and calm, "let's discuss the future of TechVision." For the next 30 minutes, Campbell watched in growing disbelief as Keanu and Jordan presented a comprehensive analysis of the company's operations, finances, and market position. Their understanding went far beyond superficial. They had identified inefficiencies, vulnerabilities, and opportunities that Campbell himself had missed or ignored. When they opened the floor for questions, Campbell seized his moment. "Your analysis fails to account for the competitive realities of our industry," he interjected. "The aggressive streamlining measures I implemented were necessary to maintain market dominance. Our shareholders have benefited tremendously." Keanu nodded, acknowledging the point without agreeing. "Shareholders have indeed seen returns. But at what cost? Your own reports show increasing customer complaints, rising employee turnover, and declining innovation metrics." Campbell waved dismissively. "Temporary fluctuations. The numbers that matter are profit, growth, and market share." "The numbers that matter," Keanu countered, "are the ones that ensure sustainable success. A 63% increase in stress-related health claims among your staff. A 42% decline in employee-generated innovations. These aren't fluctuations, they're warnings." Campbell's composure began to crack. "With all due respect, Mr. Reeves, this sounds like Hollywood idealism. In the real world, business requires difficult decisions. Not everyone gets what they want." Keanu leaned forward slightly. "Like Mark Wilson?" The name hung in the air. Campbell's brow furrowed momentarily before recognition dawned. "Who?" "Mark Wilson. Accounting department. He came to you 3 weeks ago requesting a modest raise to help cover his mother's medical expenses. Expenses incurred because your health plan reduced coverage for long-term conditions last quarter to save 0.3% on operating costs." Campbell's face reddened. "I meet with dozens of employees. I can't be expected to remember every conversation or make exceptions based on personal circumstances." "You didn't meet with dozens," Jordan interjected, opening a folder. "According to your calendar, Mark Wilson was one of only 3 non-executive employees granted a meeting in the past 6 months. The other 2 were fired shortly afterward." Keanu continued, his voice still calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "You told him his personal problems weren't TechVision's concern. That his mother's medical needs weren't relevant to company performance." "That's business," Campbell insisted, though his voice had lost some conviction. "Hard choices have to be made." "No, Mr. Campbell," Keanu replied. "That's your version of business. And it's not the version TechVision will practice moving forward." The room fell silent as the 2 men held each other's gaze. In that moment, Campbell realized he had fundamentally misjudged the situation. This wasn't a vanity acquisition by a wealthy celebrity. This was calculated, purposeful, and he was on the wrong side of the equation. "What exactly are you proposing?" Campbell finally asked, his voice tight. "A complete re-evaluation of TechVision's priorities," Keanu answered. "Starting with leadership." The tension in the boardroom crystallized into something tangible as Keanu's words hung in the air. Campbell's fingers tightened around his pen, his knuckles whitening with the pressure. The executive team shifted uncomfortably, sensing the inevitable collision of 2 fundamentally opposed philosophies. "You can't seriously be considering removing me," Campbell finally said, breaking the silence. "I built this company into what it is today. Our market position, our technology portfolio, our profit margins. All of this exists because of my leadership." Keanu nodded, acknowledging the statement without agreeing. "TechVision has certainly achieved financial success under your guidance. No one disputes that. But a company is more than its balance sheet." He opened a folder and slid several documents across the table. "These are employee satisfaction surveys from the past 3 years. Morale has dropped 67% since you implemented your optimization strategy. Burnout rates are triple the industry average. Innovation metrics have plummeted because people are too exhausted and demoralized to create. Campbell's expression hardened. People don't always like what's necessary. Tough leadership isn't a popularity contest. It's not about popularity, Jordan interjected. It's about sustainability. You've been burning through human capital like it's an infinite resource. It isn't. Keanu's gaze remained steady. We've reviewed your decisions, Richard. The pattern is clear. When faced with a choice between people and profit, you've consistently sacrificed people. That approach ends today. Campbell leaned forward, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. I have contracts, protections. My severance package alone would cost this company millions. The disruption from my departure would tank the stock price. You're not just making a mistake, you're committing corporate suicide. Keanu slid another document across the table. Your employment contract contains several interesting clauses, particularly Section 12.3 regarding ethical business conduct and fiduciary responsibility. Campbell's face paled slightly as he scanned the highlighted text. Our legal team has identified 17 instances where your decisions directly violated these provisions, Keanu continued. From the unauthorized reclassification of full-time employees to avoid benefit obligations, to the deliberate misrepresentation of workplace safety data, to the suppression of harassment complaints against executives. The room had gone completely silent. Several board members exchanged alarmed glances. Richard Campbell, Keanu said, his voice gentle but unyielding, you're fired, effective immediately. Security will escort you to clear your office. Your access credentials have already been revoked. Campbell stared in disbelief, then laughed, a harsh, brittle sound. You can't do this. The shareholders approved this course of action yesterday, Jordan finished. Once they reviewed the documentation of your ethical violations, they were quite eager to distance themselves from potential liability. Campbell stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This isn't over. I'll fight this. I have connections, resources. So do we, Keanu replied simply. The difference is, we're fighting for something beyond ourselves. Campbell looked around the table, seeking allies among the executives he'd ruled for years. He found none. One by one, they lowered their eyes, unwilling to go down with their captain. As the security team appeared at the door, Campbell gathered his papers with shaking hands. His empire, built through ruthless efficiency and moral compromise, had crumbled in less than 24 hours. His final glance back held not regret but bitterness, the look of a man who still believed his only mistake was getting caught. Mark Wilson sat nervously in the small conference room on the executive floor, a space he had never been invited to enter before today. The email had arrived an hour ago, a request for a meeting with the new ownership. His co-workers had looked at him with a mixture of concern and curiosity when he announced he had been summoned upstairs. In TechVision's previous culture, such meetings usually ended with someone clearing out their desk. The door opened, and Mark stood quickly, smoothing his tie. Keanu Reeves entered alone, casually dressed compared to TechVision's formal corporate environment. Mark, thank you for coming up. Please sit. Keanu's tone was warm, setting an immediate contrast to the intimidating atmosphere these rooms had always carried. Mark sat, hands folded tightly in his lap. Mr. Reeves, I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you, though I'm not sure why I was selected. Keanu took a seat across from him. First, I owe you an explanation. Our brief meeting in the lobby wasn't entirely coincidental. After we spoke, I became curious about TechVision. Understanding dawned on Mark's face. You bought this company because of me? Not exactly, Keanu smiled. But our encounter showed me something important about how this company treats its people. You became the lens through which I saw a broader problem. He slid a folder across the table. I've looked into your work history here. Your performance reviews are consistently excellent. You identified the tax strategy that saved the company hundreds of thousands. You've never missed a deadline despite working with outdated systems and reduced staff. Mark flushed slightly at the recognition. I just try to do my job well, sir. And your mother's health situation? How is she doing? The question caught Mark off guard. She's struggling. The new medication is helping, but it's expensive. I had to borrow money from friends to afford it. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. As of this morning, TechVision has a new health plan. Comprehensive coverage, no exclusions for pre-existing conditions, and a special provision for dependent family members. Your mother will be covered, retroactive to the first of the month. Mark blinked rapidly, trying to process this information. I don't know what to say. There's more, Keanu continued. We're creating a new department focused on employee welfare and sustainable business practices. I've reviewed your personnel file, your education background, and the proposals you submitted to HR last year about improving company culture. Mark was genuinely surprised. Those proposals were rejected. I didn't think anyone had even read them. Not only did I read them, I think they're exactly what TechVision needs. Keanu leaned forward. I'd like you to head this new department, Mark. Full director level, reporting directly to the executive team. The room seemed to tilt slightly as Mark processed the offer. But I'm just an accounting clerk. Surely there are more qualified. You understand this company from the ground up. You've experienced the problems firsthand, yet you've remained compassionate and solution-oriented. That's exactly the perspective we need. Keanu extended his hand. Will you help us build a better TechVision? Mark looked at the offered hand, then met Keanu's gaze. For the first time in years, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Yes, he said, his voice firm as he shook Keanu's hand. I would be honored. 6 months later, TechVision headquarters buzzed with a different kind of energy. The sterile, stress-filled atmosphere had given way to something more sustainable, more human. The lobby, once a mere transition space, now featured comfortable seating areas where employees from different departments gathered for impromptu collaboration sessions. A small plaque near the entrance read simply, "People first, profit follows." Mark Wilson sat in his new office, reviewing quarterly reports that told a remarkable story. Employee retention had increased by 42%. Sick days had decreased by a third. Most surprisingly to the skeptics, productivity metrics were up across every department. The company's stock value had initially dipped after Campbell's departure, but had since recovered and surpassed previous highs as investors recognized the benefits of TechVision's new approach. The employee welfare department that Mark now directed had implemented dozens of changes. Flexible scheduling, comprehensive health care, child care assistance, educational opportunities, and mental health resources. The cost of these programs had been offset by decreased recruiting expenses, reduced training costs, and a remarkable surge in employee-generated innovations. Mark checked his watch and gathered his notes for the monthly board meeting. As he walked through the accounting department, his old home, he exchanged warm greetings with former colleagues. The desks were the same, the work similar, but the atmosphere had transformed. People smiled. They collaborated. They brought their full selves to work because they no longer had to sacrifice their humanity for their paychecks. Across town, in a coffee shop far removed from corporate towers, Richard Campbell sat alone, nursing a cooling cup of coffee. His promised legal battle had evaporated when more evidence of his ethical violations emerged. Former allies had distanced themselves, unwilling to risk association with his tarnished reputation. He scrolled through job listings on his tablet, his applications to executive positions repeatedly rejected. The business world had moved on without him. In a quiet corner office at TechVision, Keanu reviewed the latest community impact report. His involvement remained largely behind the scenes. He attended board meetings remotely and visited the office infrequently. He preferred that the spotlight shine on the work, not on him. The true satisfaction came from watching Mark Wilson flourish, seeing employees thrive, and knowing that one company could demonstrate a better way of doing business. The transformation of TechVision stood as living proof that compassion and commerce could coexist, that seeing people as human beings rather than resources wasn't just the right thing to do, but the smart thing too.